The dining hall of the luxury hotel was buzzing with activity. Waiters moved swiftly between tables, carrying trays laden with gourmet dishes. The faint clinking of glasses and hushed conversations created an ambiance of sophistication. Warren Buffett sat at a small corner table, his attire simple and unassuming, a quiet contrast to the grandeur around him. He had been traveling and decided to enjoy a meal before heading to his room. When the waiter approached, Warren smiled politely and placed his order. "I'll take a grilled salmon with steamed vegetables, please," he said, handing the menu back. The waiter nodded and walked toward the kitchen, where the staff were busy preparing dishes with precision. As he called out Warren's order, the head chef, a stern-looking man with a spotless white jacket, turned sharply. "For which table?" he asked, his tone curt. "Corner table," the waiter replied, gesturing toward Warren. The chef craned his neck to glance through the small window in the kitchen door, his expression hardening when he saw the modestly dressed older man. The chef scoffed, setting down his knife with a loud clatter. "I don't waste my skills on people like him," he said dismissively. "Tell him we're out of salmon." The waiter hesitated, confused by the chef's sudden disdain. "But he's a paying guest," he said cautiously. "I don't care," the chef snapped. "Look at him. He's probably going to complain about the price or leave a lousy tip. I have real customers to cook for." Uncomfortable but unwilling to argue, the waiter returned to Warren's table. He forced a smile as he relayed the chef's message. "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but we're out of salmon tonight." Warren's eyebrows raised slightly, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He nodded slowly and glanced at the bustling kitchen. "Out of salmon, huh?" he said calmly. "All right then, I'll take the filet mignon." The waiter froze for a moment, knowing full well that the filet mignon was on the menu. Still, he nodded and hurried back to the kitchen. When he relayed the new order, the chef's expression turned livid. "I said I'm not cooking for him," the chef barked, his voice loud enough to turn heads in the kitchen. "Tell him to order something else, or better yet, tell him to eat somewhere else." The tension in the kitchen was palpable as the staff exchanged uneasy glances. The waiter, caught in the middle, reluctantly returned to Warren's table with the news. "I'm very sorry, sir," he began nervously. "It seems there's been an issue with your order." Warren's calm demeanor didn't waver, but there was a sharpness in his gaze now. He set his napkin down and leaned back in his chair. "An issue," he repeated. "May I ask what kind of issue?" The waiter hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. Before he could say anything, Warren stood up, adjusting his jacket. "You know what? I think I'll go and ask the chef myself." The room grew quieter as Warren made his way toward the kitchen, his steps measured and deliberate. The staff watched with bated breath, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. Warren pushed open the swinging kitchen doors, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the bustling staff. The head chef, standing at the center of the kitchen, was barking orders to his team, oblivious to Warren's approach. The clatter of pans and the sizzle of hot oil filled the air, but the moment Warren stopped just a few feet away, the noise seemed to fade. "Excuse me," Warren said calmly, his voice cutting through the activity like a knife. The chef turned, his expression souring as he recognized the modestly dressed man from the corner table. "What are you doing back here?" the chef snapped, folding his arms across his chest. "This is a restricted area." Warren's eyes swept the room, taking in the curious stares of the kitchen staff. "I thought I'd come and speak directly with the person responsible for my meal, or lack thereof," he said evenly. "I was told twice that my orders couldn't be prepared. First, you were out of salmon. Then, there was an issue with the filet mignon. I just wanted to understand why. The chef smirked, his posture defiant. Look, sir, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. We have a standard here. I cook for people who appreciate fine dining, not for someone who looks like they'd complain about the price of water. I'm not wasting my time on you. A hush fell over the room. The other staff froze, their eyes darting between the chef and Warren. The tension was palpable, but Warren's expression remained calm. He clasped his hands in front of him, his demeanor more curious than offended. I see, Warren said, his tone thoughtful. And is this how you treat all your guests, or am I just special? The chef shrugged, his smirk widening. I call it like I see it. I've got a reputation to uphold, and frankly, you don't look like the kind of customer who belongs here. For a moment, Warren didn't say anything. He simply studied the chef, his calm gaze unwavering. Then, with a faint smile, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it, revealing his ID, and held it up for the chef to see. The room seemed to hold its breath as the chef leaned closer, squinting at the name on the card. His smirk faltered, his face going pale as recognition dawned. Warren. Buffett? He whispered, his voice barely audible. That's right, Warren said, slipping the ID back into his pocket. And as it happens, I own a considerable stake in this hotel chain. The silence that followed was deafening. The chef's bravado crumbled, replaced by panic. His eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but the staff avoided his gaze, clearly unwilling to align themselves with his behavior. I didn't know, the chef stammered, his earlier confidence replaced with a shaky attempt at damage control. If I'd known who you were. Warren raised a hand, cutting him off. That's exactly the problem, he said, his tone firm but calm. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Every guest in this hotel deserves the same level of care, whether they're a billionaire or a bellhop. The chef's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Warren turned to the rest of the staff, addressing them directly. Let this be a lesson. Your work, no matter how skilled, is meaningless without integrity. The way you treat people defines who you are, far more than the food you serve or the reputation you think you're protecting. With that, Warren stepped back, adjusting his jacket. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be heading back to my table. If it's not too much trouble, I'd still like that salmon. The staff watched in stunned silence as Warren walked out of the kitchen, leaving the chef standing there, speechless and humiliated. As Warren returned to his table, the air in the dining hall was thick with curiosity. The guests had noticed his calm but purposeful walk back from the kitchen, and whispers rippled through the room. Warren sat down, adjusting his napkin with the same quiet composure he'd shown all evening. Back in the kitchen, the chef was still frozen in place, his mind racing. The enormity of his mistake hit him like a freight train. He glanced at his team, who avoided his gaze, their faces a mixture of disapproval and disbelief. Finally, snapping out of his daze, he barked at the sous chef, "Prepare the salmon. Make it perfect." But the sous chef didn't move. Instead, he stood tall and looked the chef in the eye. "You should be the one to cook it," he said quietly. "It's your mistake to fix." The chef's jaw tightened, but the weight of his guilt silenced his protests. He knew there was no way out. Without a word, he walked to the counter, rolled up his sleeves, and began preparing the meal himself. The kitchen staff watched in silence, the atmosphere heavy with tension and unspoken judgment. Meanwhile, out in the dining hall, the manager approached Warren's table, his face pale and his hands wringing nervously. "Mr. Buffett," he began, his voice trembling slightly. Please accept my deepest apologies for what happened. I assure you this is not how we operate, and it will never happen again. Warren looked up from his phone, his expression neutral. I appreciate the apology, he said, his voice calm but firm. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling park. Warren Buffett strolled quietly along the paved path, his hands tucked into the pockets of his simple jacket. He loved walking through places like this, blending into the world without the weight of his name. Today, however, something caught his eye. A young girl sitting on the edge of the park's fountain, carefully arranging small handmade bracelets on a piece of cloth spread out in front of her. Her clothes were slightly worn, and her tiny frame seemed out of place against the busy backdrop of the park. Yet, there was something captivating about her. She worked with a quiet determination, her small hands deftly threading beads and tying knots. A cardboard sign rested beside her, its letters slightly crooked, but clear enough to read, "Handmade jewelry, $5, for my mom." Warren slowed his pace, watching as people passed by the girl, without sparing her more than a glance. A few children paused to look, but their parents quickly ushered them along, throwing dismissive glances toward the girl's little setup. She sat there patiently, her hopeful eyes scanning the crowd for someone, anyone, who might stop. As Warren observed, a man in a crisp suit paused briefly near the girl's spot. She looked up eagerly, holding up one of her bracelets. "Would you like to buy one, sir? They're only $5, she said, her voice soft but hopeful. The man barely glanced at the bracelet before waving her off. "No, thank you," he said curtly, his tone dismissive. He walked away quickly, muttering something under his breath that Warren couldn't quite hear, but the tone was unmistakable. It stung. The girl's shoulders slumped slightly, but she quickly straightened and resumed arranging her bracelets, as though determined not to let the rejection show. Warren felt a pang in his chest. He didn't know her story, but her resolve was undeniable. He decided to approach, curious to understand what had brought her here. As he neared, the girl looked up at him, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Hello, sir," she said politely. "Would you like to buy a bracelet? They're only $5, and they're handmade." Warren crouched slightly, picking up one of the bracelets. It was simple, made of colorful beads and a thin piece of string, but there was something honest and heartfelt in its design. "These are beautiful," he said with a genuine smile. "You made all of these yourself?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. I make them every night after school. My mom says I should focus on homework, but I want to help her. She's been sick, and we're behind on rent." Warren's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "That's a very brave thing you're doing," he said, his voice warm. "How has business been today?" The girl hesitated, glancing down at the small tin box beside her. "Not very good," she admitted quietly, "but I'm not giving up." Warren studied her for a moment, his mind already racing with thoughts. He handed her a $20 bill and picked up the bracelet. "I'll take this one," he said, "and keep the change." The girl's eyes widened as she took the bill. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You don't know how much this helps." Warren smiled and nodded. "You're welcome," he said, standing up. "But tell me, what would you do if you had a little more money?" The girl tilted her head, clearly puzzled by the question. "More money?" she repeated. I'd pay the rent, get my mom the medicine she needs, and maybe buy more beads to make better bracelets." Warren's smile deepened, but he didn't say anything more. Instead, he walked away slowly, his mind already forming a plan. The girl watched him go, her heart lighter than it had been all day, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. The next morning, Warren returned to the park, this time with a small envelope tucked into the inner pocket of his jacket. He walked the familiar path, scanning the area until he spotted the girl in the same spot near the fountain. Her blanket was neatly spread out, and her bracelets, though modest, were arranged with care. She was already busy tying beads onto a string, her tiny fingers moving with practiced precision. Warren approached quietly, watching as a middle-aged couple stopped briefly near her setup. The girl looked up hopefully, offering them her brightest smile. "Good morning. Would you like to buy a bracelet? They're only $5, and they're handmade." The man glanced at the bracelets but shook his head, giving a polite but uninterested smile. "No, thank you," he said, before walking away with his wife. The girl's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly composed herself, her resilience shining through as she adjusted her display. Warren stepped closer, his shadow falling over the blanket. The girl looked up, her expression brightening when she recognized him. "You're back," she said excitedly. "But apologies only mean something if they're followed by action. I'd like to see that chef treated the same as he treated me, held accountable for his choices." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll ensure this situation is addressed appropriately." Warren leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Good. And not just for me. Treat every guest with the respect they deserve. That's the only standard that matters." As the manager retreated, the chef finally emerged from the kitchen, carrying Warren's plate himself. The grilled salmon was presented with precision, the aroma filling the air as the chef placed it on the table. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. I made this myself, Mr. Buffett," the chef said, his voice low. "I'm sorry for how I acted. I let my pride get in the way of doing my job." Warren studied the plate for a moment before looking up at the chef. "It's a good start," he said simply. "Now, let's hope the taste matches the presentation." The chef stepped back as Warren picked up his fork and took a bite. The dining hall seemed to collectively hold its breath as he chewed, his expression unreadable. Finally, Warren nodded. "Not bad," he said, setting the fork down. "But the real test isn't in the food. It's in how you move forward. Remember that." The chef nodded slowly, his face flushed with a mix of relief and embarrassment. "I will," he promised. As Warren finished his meal, the atmosphere in the dining hall shifted. The guests, who had been whispering about the incident moments before, now looked at him with a newfound respect. The lesson wasn't just for the chef or the staff. It was for everyone in the room. Warren stood, leaving a generous tip on the table, and adjusted his jacket. As he walked out of the dining hall, the staff watched him go, his calm presence leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed the evening's events. By the time the night ended, the chef and the manager had already begun discussing changes to the way the hotel operated. The incident had been humbling, but it was also transformative. They realized that respect, integrity, and humility weren't just good for business. They were essential for humanity.